Picture this: San Francisco, 1950. The Cold War is heating up, and the U.S. government is on high alert, paranoid about the threat of biological warfare. They needed to know what would happen if a major American city was attacked with a biological agent. How would it spread? How many people would be affected? To find the answers, they decided to run an experiment. A secret, massive, and incredibly risky experiment on its own citizens. This is the story of Operation Sea Spray, one of the most unsettling large-scale human experiments in American history. For 6 days in September 1950, a U.S. Navy ship, the USS Milani, sailed just off the coast of San Francisco. Its mission? To release massive plumes of bacteria into the air, letting the city's famous fog carry them inland. The goal was to simulate a biological attack and map the dispersion of the germs. The military chose 2 types of bacteria for this test: Serratia marcescens and Bacillus glabigi. At the time, they were considered completely harmless. Serratia marcescens was particularly useful because it produces a bright red pigment, making it easy to track on culture plates. So, the Navy sprayed an aerosolized mist of these bacteria, which was then carried by the wind over the entire Bay Area. And the results were, well, successful from a military standpoint. The bacteria blanketed the city and its surrounding areas, reaching an estimated 800,000 residents. Monitoring stations set up across 43 locations in the region confirmed that the germs had traveled far and wide. The experiment showed that a biological attack could indeed be devastatingly effective, contaminating a huge population with ease. The military had its data. They had proven their point. But there was a huge, unforeseen problem. The assumption that these bacteria were harmless turned out to be tragically wrong. Shortly after the spraying, a local hospital, then called Stanford University Hospital, noticed a bizarre spike in patients with rare and severe urinary tract infections. 11 people were admitted, all suffering from infections caused by, you guessed it, Serratia marcescens. These weren't just any infections. They were resistant to the antibiotics of the day, making them incredibly difficult to treat. Of the 11 patients, one of them, a 75-year-old man named Edward Nevin, was recovering from prostate surgery, developed complications. His infections spread to his heart, and he tragically died. This was the first recorded death from a Serratia marcescens infection in the hospital's history. For years, the source of this sudden, localized outbreak was a complete mystery to the doctors. It was a medical puzzle. Why this specific, rare bacteria, and why all at once? The public, of course, had no idea they had been the unwitting subjects of a massive military experiment. The spraying was done in complete secrecy. The people of San Francisco just went about their lives, breathing in air that had been deliberately filled with bacteria. It wasn't until the 1970s that the truth started to emerge. In 1976, news reports, citing declassified Army intelligence documents, exposed Operation Sea Spray to the world. The story was shocking. The U.S. government had used one of its own cities as a giant open-air laboratory, without the knowledge or consent of its citizens. When the family of Edward Nevin learned about the experiment, they filed a lawsuit against the federal government. They argued that the military's negligence directly led to his death. The case went to court, and the government's defense was, to put it mildly, chilling. They didn't deny the spraying. Instead, they argued that they were under no obligation to inform the public about their secret tests. Furthermore, they claimed it was impossible to prove a direct link between their experiment and Nevin's death. The bacteria could have come from anywhere, they suggested. The court ultimately sided with the government. The judge ruled that the military had a right to conduct these tests in the interest of national security, and that the link to Nevin's death was not definitively proven. The family lost their case. But Operation Sea Spray wasn't an isolated incident. Declassified records revealed that between 1949 and 1969, The U.S. military conducted hundreds of similar vulnerability tests across the country. They released bacteria in the New York City subway system, in the Pentagon, and at Washington National Airport. They sprayed zinc cadmium sulfide, a fluorescent chemical compound, over cities like St. Louis to see how particles would spread. While they claimed this chemical was safe, later studies raised concerns about its potential health effects. These experiments raise profound ethical questions that are still relevant today. What is the line between national security and public safety? Can a government ever be justified in experimenting on its own citizens without their consent? The thinking at the time was driven by the fear of the Cold War. The logic was that it was better to test these things and be prepared, even if it meant taking risks. The potential devastation of a real biological attack from an enemy was seen as a far greater threat. However, the victims and their families saw it differently. For them, it was a betrayal of trust. The very institutions meant to protect them had put them in harm's way. The case of Operation Sea Spray serves as a stark reminder of what can happen when fear and secrecy are allowed to override ethical considerations and public transparency. The legacy of these experiments is a complex one. On one hand, they provided valuable data for biodefense strategies. On the other, they left a trail of public mistrust and unanswered questions about long-term health consequences. Many people who lived in the test areas have wondered for years. Mysterious illnesses they or their families experienced could be linked to these secret tests. Today, there are strict regulations and ethical oversight committees in place to prevent such experiments from ever happening again. The concept of informed consent is now a cornerstone of all medical and scientific research involving human subjects. But the story of Operation Sea Spray is a crucial part of our history. A cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of holding our governments accountable. It reminds us that good intentions can sometimes lead to disastrous outcomes, and that the health and safety of the public should never be taken for granted. What do you think about this? Was the government justified in its actions, given the context of the Cold War? Or was it an unforgivable breach of public trust? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. It's a fascinating and disturbing piece of history that deserves to be discussed. Thanks for watching, and if you found this story as compelling as I did, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into history's hidden stories. See you next time.